So, the last Remnants post was written about 6 months ago. After the easy-to-follow Remnants Railroad had ended, I decided to look into Takeru and Tomoe's story, since I was adamant that the original text would tell me more than any localization. The more I read and discovered, the more questions I had, and almost zero answers. At some point, it just became overwhelming. Hopeful still, I decided to expand the research for this post beyond Takeru and Tomoe, and look at Kuro since he is also a Dragonair, and at Wolf through the position he shares with Tomoe. And then Dragonrot, and then the dragon in his tears. As you can probably guess, it became even more overwhelming and just led to more and more questions. I love Sekiro more than any other Soulsborne title, mostly because it has a very coherent story and fleshed out characters. You're not a random Ashen One bearer of the curse, but a character with a personal story that goes far back before the plot picks up. You're Wolf and you're a shinobi. You have a foster father, a mentor, and a little master that you're sworn to protect, and you're not sure if you need to cook rice before eating it. The rest of the characters also have their personal stories and connections that are, oh my god, explained to you through dialogues that are abundant in Sekiro compared to other FromSoft games. I think I got so incredibly crestfallen and discouraged to continue my research because I stepped right into Miyazaki's trap. Since the story in Sekiro is so detailed and the cast of main and secondary characters is so fleshed out, I became completely lost in the illusion that this story has all the answers. I just need to find them. And if I can't find the answers, well, it just means that I'm stupid. I didn't really like feeling stupid, so I continued pondering the million questions, doing some translations when I was feeling slightly less crestfallen than usual, and waiting for some kind of revelation. When I was searching Hirata Estate and looking at every single wooden plank with a monocular, I was thinking whether the people of the Hirata clan even knew who Kuro was, and also who gave him that dofku that he wears with an embroidered Dragonair sigil on the back. I was sure that I will find the sigil somewhere in Hirata Estate, but my search proved fruitless and I didn't find anything that would even remotely indicate that the estate was home to a Dragonair. It was the moment of revelation, even if it wasn't exactly the revelation I expected. Here's what I thought. Answers I'm searching for might not even be there, and that's not the point of the project. In my pursuit of the truth, I forgot the simple fact that this game was still made by FromSoft, which means it was made by Miyazaki. If the story is more detailed and more upfront than the stories that came before, it still doesn't mean that it contains all the answers. I'm not stupid because I can't find them. They might not even be there. At what point did this research become the hunt for the truth anyway? I'm interested to see whether the localization succeeded or failed in adapting the many nuances of the Sekiro story and lore, how much was lost, and how crucial the losses are. Of course, I want to uncover all the secrets, but it's not the point, and it never was. Cool if I can construct a new theory and back it up with the facts that I find while reading the original, but the point of the world of Sekiro was never theory crafting. In time, my focus shifted, I lost my initial course, and it distorted my workflow. Add to this the feeling of hyper-responsibility I have for everything I write or say, and the picture is pretty sad. Honestly though, I get anxious about every single kanji as if me misreading or mistyping a prosthetic tool name or some other stuff will lead to some kind of real-life harm. It's ridiculous. I think I've got to lower some aspects of my ludicrous standards and just relax a bit, otherwise I'll never finish this project. Well, enough with the gloom. As usual, we'll quickly go over the disclaimers, legend, and sources. If it's not your first time around, feel free to skip ahead. Number 1. Use common sense. Please do not assume that I have access to some secret true knowledge. I don't. I'm just entertained by reading Sekiro in Japanese. My lore theories are just theories, so treat them accordingly. Number 2, I am not a professional translator. I have never worked in localization. Yes, I will say that something is translated poorly and something is not, and it will be my personal point of view. Ultimately, my goal is to give you the information so you can see if the localization was good or not, whether something important was lost or not. My opinion is just that, and I choose to share it. Number 3, I'm not an expert on Buddhism. I will leave links to the Buddhist terms that we will encounter so you can read more on your own if you're interested. As usual, the transcriptions I give do not follow all academic rules, and I don't think it's necessary. They're just here to represent the pronunciation in case you're curious. All sources I used for this research will be listed in the description box below, along with all the additional information that I referenced throughout the video, so you can read more if you're interested. There you will also find a link to my original blog post if you want to read it through. For some weird reason, I've always been reading Takeru's kanji as Take, and I was sure that he is Lord Take, but the English localization invented Takeru so people wouldn't read him as Lord Take. I believe I refer to him as Lord Take in some of my videos, sorry about that. He is indeed written as Take, but is read as Takeru, according to both Kuro and Emma. I have no clue how I missed it, but now I'm finally on the right track. Sorry for misleading you. This kanji is present in many Japanese personal names. It can be read as Takashi, as Tsukasa, as Takeru, and in many other ways. It denotes some fairly general concepts such as height, stature, and a specific one, magnificence, like of a poem. I would love to gain more understanding as to why this name, and most importantly, this kanji, was chosen for him, because currently I have no clue. Lady Tomoe didn't surprise me at all. Her name is written as Tomoe. Tomoe is a symbol traditionally used in Japanese mon, meaning family crests or sigils. Tomoe looks like a comma-like swirl and resembles a magatama. It is hard to say where the concept of Tomoe comes from. Some people think that it originates from Tomoe, a round arm protector that Japanese archers used to wear. The best thing is that in Sekiro, Tomoe as a symbol is used in the Fountainhead Palace sigil. It's right in the middle. To be precise, it is a Hidari Mitsudomoe, left threefold Tomoe symbol. This Tomoe looks like a vortex, that is why it is often in part associated with water and placed on the roofs to serve as a protection from fire. All Sekiro wikis say that Tomoe's character is based on Tomoe Gozen. She was a legendary warrior that appeared in the 14th century Japanese literature. She was never proven to exist, but she served as an inspiration for many generations of samurai. Tomoe Gozen is said to wield masterfully both a bow and a sword. This historical reference for a character is one of a few that I can believe. Many Sekiro wikis say that every single character in the game is based on a bunch of historical characters. It's kind of exhausting. However, I think that Tomoe Gozen and Lady Tomoe parallel is solid. We'll look at Takeru and Tomoe's associated items as we try to reconstruct the approximate timeline. We know that Tomoe and Takeru lived in Ashina Castle shortly before the story picks up. Genichiro was learning his sword and bow skills from Tomoe, and Emma remembers her dancing beneath the branches of the Everblossom. It is unknown whether Kuro and Takeru existed simultaneously, but I think they did not. Consequently, it's highly unlikely that Wolf ever met Takeru or Tomoe. Spiral Cloud Passage is basically the floating passage upgrade and the most expensive combat art in the game. Its original name is Uzugumo Watari. Uzugumo consists of whirlpool/vortex and cloud. The English localization called it Spiral Cloud. Emma mentions the Spiral Cloud in the Dragon Spring Sake dialogue, and you can actually see it for yourself if you look on the horizon to the left of Takeru and Tomoe's graves. The last paragraph is what we're after here, since it tells us a very important thing that was not adapted by the English localization in the best way. Her master gazed longingly at the fountainhead spiral. For Tomoe, his little figure meant everything. The localization says young master, but the original says chisana senaka, small back of a body, meaning small height. I think it is safe to say that Takeru looked like Kuro. Do Dragonairs age, or do they always look like children? Are they just chosen at a young age? There isn't anything tragic happening yet, but we can clearly see how much Takeru misses home. If you, much like myself, didn't notice, the little combat art pictures depict those who are supposed to wield this art. You can see little monks drawn in temple arts, little samurai in Ashina style, and for the floating passage, Spiral Cloud Passage, and Sakura Dance, it's Okami. If I had some tiny doubts about Tomoe really being an Okami warrior, now I have none. Tomoe was indeed an Okami warrior. Paige's diary is really straightforward, Koshou no Nikki. It's one of the few items that describe Takeru and Tomoe's attempts to return to Senkyo, Divine Realm where the dragon resides. The original says that Takeru's wound healed while the page was blinking, so he didn't see the wound itself. It corresponds to what we see later in the game. Kuro handles the mortal blade himself. Moreover, he asks Wolf to close his eyes so that he wouldn't be able to see the blood. Maybe you can't watch a Dragonair bleed because their blood is divine. On the other hand, when Kuro is stabbed by Genichiro with the second mortal blade, he bleeds all over the place and no one is closing eyes. I don't know. Takeru and Tomoe tried to reconstruct the fountainhead fragrance, but ultimately could not, since they didn't have the mortal blade to spill the Dragonair's blood. As we are about to find out, the mortal blade, or rather the lack of it, became the reason why Takeru and Tomoe perished. It's interesting that Kuro finds this diary in Genichiro's study. How did it end up there? Maybe Genichiro kept whatever mentions of Tomoe were left after she died in memory of her. They must have been close as a teacher and a student. Koba Nanoshuki is literally fragrant flower note. The localization says relatives of Tomoe. The original uses the word ichizoku. It can mean family, also in a very broad sense, relatives or a clan, and I think clan is the most fitting option here. It is unknown to whom this note was addressed. It obviously isn't Tomoe. Was Takeru writing this note for the next Dragonair because he knew the next one would come? Did he intend to send someone else for the white flower? But who? Well, maybe he was just keeping a diary. Curious that the recipe for the fountainhead fragrance Takeru most likely received from Tomoe, since it was her clan that successfully constructed it in the first place and reached the fountainhead palace. Just imagine, in unspecified time, a clan gathered all the ingredients for the fragrance and ascended. It means that they did not only have the Dragonair, but also the mortal blade to draw the heir's blood. This is kind of mind-blowing. To be honest, I always liked the theory of Okami arriving to Ashina together with the dragon, but apparently it's not what happened. A clan of humans, the women of the clan to be precise, gathered the fragrance and descended. For all I can tell, they started to transform into Okami while living in the palace. They have a fairly simple life. They watch sakura trees, drink sake, dance, play kemari, and just enjoy their eternal existence. It's a dream, really. I have no clue why carpmen eat them and why Okami seem to be protecting them. It is also unknown if the Okami in the palace are the very same people who ascended or their descendants. Maybe the answers I'm looking for are not there, or maybe I just can't find them. Who knows? We know that in the lands of Ashina there are those who have Okami's blood. For example, Shirahagi, Shirafuji, and apparently Urin. Also, in theory, Tomoe wouldn't be able to retrieve the flower since you have to cross the poisonous swamps to get there, and Okami are particularly vulnerable to poison. Maybe that was the reason that Takeru was instructing somebody else to go and get the flower. Sakura Dance was added to the game later with the gauntlets, and since I'm not usually interested in boss rushes, I didn't even know this combat art existed. It has a very beautiful name, Sakura Mai, Sakura Dance. The localization conveys the mechanics of this combat art really well. They did some sentence combining there, and the results are quite impressive. The rest of the description is honestly heartbreaking to read. The day when sakura blossoms fall is already close. If we cannot return, then at least this dance. Sametamo means at the very least, but can also be used to describe something minimal one does for comfort or consolation. So the localization is not wrong here, and their version makes for a better sentence. The Japanese version doesn't use any pronouns in the phrase if cannot return, but since they intended to go back home together, I'd say that Tomoe was talking about herself here too. This must be after Owl broke off the Aromatic Branch and the Everblossom started withering. The only thing Takeru and Tomoe now have as a memory of the Fountainhead Palace and the Divine Realm is this dance. If you look closely at the picture, you can see tiny sakura petals around little Okami. Okami from the Fountainhead Palace have a very similar attack, although it does not stir around any petals. At this point, Tomoe and Takeru cannot return home, but they still have the Everblossom. Tomoe's note original name is exactly what you would expect, Tomoe no Shiki, Tomoe's note. It is unknown for whom Tomoe wrote this note, probably for the sole purpose of pushing this storyline. From this note, we learned what happened to Takeru and why he and Tomoe started to search for a way to get rid of the dragon's heritage. I really like how the English localization preserves tiny details of these descriptions like soft handwriting. Not all localizations do, from my experience. Lord Takeru's cough is becoming worse. This is the key sentence that allows us to unravel the whole tragedy behind Takeru and Tomoe's storyline. We will talk about Dragon Rod in the next video, but what you need to know is that in the original it is called Ryuseki, Dragon Cough. This note tells us that the Dragonairs themselves can catch Dragon Rod, which is rather surprising. The most confusing thing to me is that for some reason, there was so much stagnation in Takeru and Tomoe's timeline that there was a dragon rot epidemic and even the Dragonair got infected. Why though? Did Tomoe die too often? Their life in the Ashina castle seemed to be really peaceful. Takeru spent his time reading books, playing the flute, and gazing at the clouds, and Tomoe was dancing and teaching Ginishiro to murder people effectively with sword and bow. How did her multiple deaths occur? It is possible that the stagnation just accumulates on its own over a very long period of time, even if the one bound by the Dragonair's blood does not die very often. At the start of the game, Emma says that before the dragon rot epidemic that Wolf starts, there was another one, and since the cure was never found, everyone who caught dragon rot died. I think it's safe to assume that the list of dragon rot victims included Lord Takeru. Returning to the Divine Realm line tells us two very important things. Number one, Takeru and Tomoe were indeed searching for a way to go back to the Divine Realm, but had to abandon this idea because they couldn't obtain the Mortal Blade. And two, returning in the original Kaeru clearly implies that they came from the Divine Realm and Takeru was born there. We'll read about it more later. Since the return was not an option, Tomoe came up with a new plan: break the shackles of the dragon's heritage and make Takeru human again. This is the ending that Emma is suggesting to Wolf, purification ending where Wolf dies and Kuro becomes human. Restoration requires the Everblossom and the Mortal Blade, and yet they cannot acquire the latter. Here you can see a kind of logical issue with Tomoe's new plan. They wanted to return to the Divine Realm, but couldn't because they didn't have the Mortal Blade to draw the Heirs' blood. The new plan is to make him human again, and for that you need the Mortal Blade twice. To construct the aroma, which they couldn't, and get the dragon's tears, and then for Tomoe to kill herself. Well, this is kind of weird. Maybe I'm missing something though. Curious that she knew for certain that the Mortal Blade was hidden by the Senpo monks but still couldn't find it. The priests did not want to sever the immortal ties, but why though? As far as I know, they didn't do anything with legitimate Dragonairs. They were conducting their experiments on the mountain and tried to produce fake Dragonairs. They didn't have any business with either Takeru or Kuro as far as we know. What profit did they have from legitimate Dragonairs being alive and keeping their divine power? Immortal Severance scrap is Ryuin Tachi no Shihen, literally a scrap of paper on Dragonair Severance. This whole term Ryuin Tachi, Dragonair Severance, sounds like something well known and documented, and honestly this book page proves that it kind of is. It's quite likely that there were many Dragonairs before Takeru, so many that the world actually has knowledge on them and on what they can do with the heritage, destroy it by sacrificing themselves or renounce it in favor of becoming human. Curiously, the beheading also sounds in Japanese as a well-established procedure, Ryuin no Kaishaku, beheading of the Dragonair. In the original text, Takeru is not all that sure that he will ask Tomoe to assist him with the beheading, but he's contemplating the idea of asking her. As we can clearly see, he, much like Kuro, came to the conclusion that there is no place for the dragon's heritage in the mortal world, and he needs to destroy it so there are no Dragonairs in the future. Takeru pursues the same ending as Kuro, Immortal Severance, where the Dragonair sacrifices themselves, breaking the shackles of the dragon's heritage, and the heritage is no more. Immortal Severance text is Ryuin Tachi no Sho, a book or a document on Dragonair's severance. The sanctuary mentioned in the description is sanctuary or a Shinto shrine in the far part of the Fountainhead Palace. Yes, the big rock through which Wolf gains access to the Divine Realm is a special rock, and the cave is referred to as the Shrine. We'll get to it in the video about the Fountainhead Palace later. Imbibe the tears is quite good. The original uses itadaku, to respectfully accept. It's a Kenjogo word that conveys the utmost respect. Remember how I told you that I spent quite a lot of time in Hirata Estate trying to find the crest of the Dragonairs that Kuro has embroidered on the back? There is a Sakura flower in the center and Sakura branches all around. Couldn't find it anywhere. Look at the blue cloth under this book. Yep, found it. The world certainly has enough knowledge on Dragonairs. Maybe they accumulated this knowledge themselves and passed it on. Maybe Takeru left everything for the next Dragonair in case he failed the Immortal Severance, hoping that they would be able to achieve something that he could not. Interestingly enough, the original name of the Aromatic Branch is Tokozakura no Kouboku, fragrant wood of the Everblossom. Koboku also denotes Japanese incense. If you remember, there is a dialogue where Kuro and Wolf discuss the incense burner that belonged to Takeru, and they notice how it still faintly smells of sakura. Probably from time to time, Takeru used the Everblossom wood for the incense burner. The Everblossom is a sakura tree, and as such is ripe with nostalgia. Sounds really poetic and kind of weird in a good way. It's trying to adapt the original line that is very short. The Everblossom is a sakura of homesickness. While the localization is generalizing that all sakura trees are ripe with nostalgia, and since the Everblossom is a sakura tree, it is too, the original is much more personal. The Everblossom is a sakura of homesickness because Takeru took the branch with him from the Divine Realm so it would remind him of home. This is the very branch that Takeru brought with him originally and then grafted onto a plain sakura tree in Ashina. Aromatic Flower is literally Tokozakura no hana, flower of flowers of the Everblossom. The Japanese text says that the branch was a nagori. This word denotes remains, a relic, but also the sorrow of parting. I think the English parting relic conveys the idea really well. Then you have the recipe for the purification ending. Give the air both Everblossom flower and dragon's tears, and then... Oh no. The recipe is incomplete. You won't achieve purification with these instructions. What about the paragraph on the one bound by the Heirs' blood? The English localization just didn't have enough space, so the paragraph was lost. Look at the picture, they've used up all the lines. The original text continues like this. And one more thing. The undying who accepted the blood of the dragon heir binds their master. This bond must be broken. So the original text gives the full guide to the purification ending. You give flowers and tears to the heir and then use the mortal blade to kill the oathbound. Emma mentions that she witnessed Tomoe's suicide attempt. Tomoe tried to commit jijin, suicide by the sword. Tomoe's words that Emma repeats are exactly as the description of the flower says, I mean the line in the quotation marks. The undying who accepted the blood of the dragon heir binds their master. These are Tomoe's words. So, of all ingredients necessary for Takeru to renounce his gift and become human again, Tomoe only had the Everblossom. She didn't have the mortal blade to end her oath, and consequently she couldn't get dragon's tears because she couldn't draw Takeru's blood and get to the dragon. Kuro asks Wolf if he noticed the lingering aroma from the incense burner, and if you choose to say yes, Wolf will say that he finds this aroma nostalgic but cannot say where or when he encountered it for the first time. Only now I realized that he felt it from his father. After Owl broke off the branch of the Everblossom, he carried it with him for years. That's why Wolf receives this branch both times he defeats him. If the aroma had lingered in the incense burner for years, I imagine that would be the same with Owl. Sakura Shizuku is literally Sakura Droplet. So the big thing with Sakura Droplet is that the localization says pale pink crystal residue known to form when an immortal oath fails to establish. Firstly, fails to establish, what does that mean? That you tried to become oathbound to the dragon heir but for some reason couldn't? This mechanism that is not mentioned anywhere else has always bothered me because there aren't any conditions that we know of that can lead to the failure in this procedure. The only connections between heirs and their oathbound we know of are successful, Takeru and Tomoe, Kuro and Wolf. Secondly, Wolf gets this crystal from Lady Butterfly, and for some time I thought that Lady Butterfly must have tried to bind herself to Kuro and somehow failed, hence the droplet. However, Kuro later says that this droplet is Lord Takeru's power. Takeru had only one oathbound, and it was Tomoe. The original says that this droplet is left when the contract of the undying ceases to exist. Funny that in the dialogue, Kuro repeats this very phrase, but the English localization translates it differently, when the undying pledge of the dragon's heritage is broken. Sakura Droplet was left when Takeru died, and thus his contract with Tomoe was broken. Curious that Kuro knows at a first glance what this item is and who it belongs to. Kuro is very knowledgeable in general. After Takeru died, this crystal probably found its way to Owl and Company, and they intended to use Kuro for activating it to get +1 Undying, although it is never explicitly said how many Undying one dragon heir can have. The English localization overall did a great job, and thanks to the pretty accurate translations, we can reconstruct this story basically how it is in the original. The last paragraph in the Aromatic Flower description is a pity, but there was nothing they could do, they just ran out of space there. We know that Tomoe couldn't save her master because she didn't have the Immortal blade. However, we can't say that she didn't try to obtain it. When Wolf arrives at the Halls of Illusion to catch the monkeys, he meets a monk. The monk tells him that there was someone else who tried to catch the monkeys, but they couldn't, and in the end they left. I thought it was Genichiro, since the English subtitles say he. However, the original conversation is gender neutral, like Japanese generally is. The monk says, "Once someone like you came here." I think by someone like you, he means the one bound by the blood of the Dragonair. He also says something about the mission, Shimei. The monk sees right away that Wolf came to the halls with the mission, and says that the one who was here before also came with the mission. It so happens that Tomoe and Wolf have exactly the same mission, so I think we can assume that Tomoe came to the Halls of Illusion, but she could not catch the monkeys and thus left without the Mortal Blade. I have to say, this story was the most interesting storyline in Sekiro for me. I yearn to learn more. Although the details of what happened many years ago to Takeru and Tomoe are quite sparse, a few item descriptions, a pinch of dialogues, we can reconstruct the story quite successfully. However, there are so many questions that we cannot answer. Why would Takeru leave the Divine Realm in the first place? He missed it so much, he wanted to go back home. He took a Sakura branch with him as a parting gift. It doesn't seem to me that he wanted to go anywhere. Why? As far as I can see, all he ever did in Ashina was reading books and playing the flute. What purpose did he have? The only theory I have right now is that sending Heirs into the mortal world was a way for the dragon to search for means of returning home. He ended up in Ashina accidentally, we know it for sure. Maybe he's homesick too. He hoped that Heirs would find a way to reach Homecoming ending. It's definitely a stretch and I have zero proof as of now, but I just wanted to share this thought anyway. Most importantly, how was Takeru even born in the Divine Realm? And as a human? Are the people just living there? Are all heirs born there? Was Kuro? How does one even become a Dragonair? Is it a random thing to just be gifted to you, or does the dragon pick and choose who gets the honor? It's just a few of the questions that overwhelmed me into not doing anything for half a year. I'm okay now. I'm still passionate about this project, and shortly I will be back on track. In the next post, we'll discuss Kuro, Wolf, Dragon's Tears, and Dragonrod. Don't forget to check the description for element links and more reading. Thank you very much for your time, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.